She said, "The moments when the United Kingdom has come together to applaud its care and essential workers will be remembered as an expression of our national spirit, and its symbol will be the rainbows drawn by children." The Queen embodied our national spirit with her great sense of community, kindness and dedicated service, for which we are eternally grateful. My thoughts and prayers and those of my constituents in Clwyd South are with her beloved family. God rest her soul, God save the King, and bless the Prince and Princess of Wales.
Vera Hophouse.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. On this sad day, I rise to pay tribute to Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. We are a nation in mourning, and I know I speak on behalf of my Bath constituents when I say we will all sorely miss her. Whether you had met Her late Majesty in person or not, we feel we knew her. She had a personal relationship with all her subjects, and she managed to combine her office as monarch of an ancient and great kingdom with the warmth and personal touch of a wonderful human being. And her great personal qualities of empathy, integrity, and humility stood as an example to us all. She, of all persons who could have been pompous, was never pompous. She saw herself as a servant all her life. That's rare, and we all owe her a huge debt of gratitude for that unstingent service. She was not just a British monarch, she was a world leader, renowned and respected throughout the world. I grew up in Hanover in Germany, and there were no more monarchs. Actually, everybody was rather squeamish about tradition. But with a royal connection between Britain and Hanover, people were perfectly happy to adopt Queen Elizabeth as our queen. And indeed, when I was young, she was perfectly useful to correct our manners. You better learn to behave in case you meet the Queen. Apart from her undoubtedly impeccable table manners, she represented to the core the best of British. In time of great turbulence, the late Queen stood as a unifier and a peacemaker. She clearly loved people and respected each and every individual for who they were. Her legacy must live on as we enter a new chapter. May she rest in peace, and long live the King.
Graham.
Some wonderful tributes, Mr. Deputy Speaker, have been given today from across the House to a simply amazing woman, our nation's unshakable rock in storms, our favourite granny, and above all our Queen, much loved and now deeply mourned in Gloucester as across the United Kingdom and abroad. For Her late Majesty touched lives not just in the 14 countries for whom she was head of state, or even the 54 countries that make up the Commonwealth family, but across the world. On July the 1st this year, I, representing Her Majesty's government at the inauguration of President Marcos of the Philippines, passed congratulations from the world's longest-serving head of state to its most recently elected. The President's face lit up. "The Queen is amazing," he said. "We all watched the Platinum Jubilee celebrations, and she has set the platinum standard for heads of state." Now, whatever our individual memories of Her late Majesty, whether of individual meetings or seeing her at visits like those to Gloucester in 2003 and 2009, or simply watching her smash hits on TV with James Bond and Paddington Bear, the President was right. The Queen was the platinum standard, the extraordinary example of leadership through service to which we all aspire. So in offering my and Gloucester residents' sympathy to the royal family, we are all grateful for that extraordinary legacy. None of us will ever forget our world's Queen or her second great Elizabethan age. And I believe King Charles's own long record of service and his moving speech this evening should give us all great confidence for the future. Thank you, Ma'am. God save the King.
James Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this morning I left my constituency of Ealing North to come into Parliament by boarding an Elizabeth line train. As we know, over time, Queen Elizabeth II's mark on our banknotes, our coins and our stamps and so on will gradually give way to the mark of King Charles III. But in our part of the country, those stations and trains mean that my constituents and I will always have a physical tribute to our greatest monarch running through our borough. Mr. Deputy Speaker, to the great disappointment of the countless primary school children who have asked me since I was elected, I never had the chance of meeting the Queen as an MP. But I know that I was not alone in feeling her presence across Greenford, Perivale, Northolt, Hanwell and Ealing during the Platinum Jubilee celebrations in June. In our diverse part of London, people of all ages, of all backgrounds, of all faiths and none, came out to celebrate the reign of our Queen and our love of our community and our country. After the separation of the pandemic, we were celebrating the Queen's Jubilee with our neighbours, and that celebration itself helped the Queen's assurance during lockdown that better days would return come true. And at those Jubilee celebrations, as in the House of Commons today, everyone had their personal reflection on the Queen and what it was about her they most admired. For me, what stands out above all else was her most incredible sense of duty and her awesome devotion to service that quite simply was her life. Mr. Deputy Speaker, on behalf of the people of Ealing North, I offer our deepest condolences to the King and the royal family, and our most heartfelt thanks for the life of Queen Elizabeth II, whose legacy will live on forever.
Paul Bristow.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's my solemn honour to pay tribute to Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II on behalf of the people of my city, Peterborough. Peterborough loved and mourns her. Her reign managed, somehow, across its 7 decades, to penetrate each of our lives and bring us together. Now we are brought together in grief. My constituents come from across the Commonwealth and beyond it. She mattered to each of them. That was her magic. And I saw it at work myself throughout the Jubilee celebrations in my city just a few months ago. Different cultures, religions, creeds, different nationalities all coming together to celebrate a truly remarkable woman. For our armed forces, for our public servants, for organisations, charities and families, and for me, there is one less certainty in an all too turbulent world. She visited Peterborough in 1952, while still Princess Elizabeth, attending the agricultural show at the old showground in Eastfield. And as our Queen, she visited on 4 more occasions. In March 1975, the Maundy Thursday service was held at Peterborough Cathedral, where she distributed the Royal Maundy coins to 49 men and 49 women in a ceremony attended by more than 3,200 people. She later went for a walk in Bridge Street and dined with her husband, the late Duke of Edinburgh, and with city councillors at the Town Hall. The Queen returned to Peterborough for a Silver Jubilee, again arriving to crowds of people at Peterborough Station. She opened our Magistrates Court and the Cresset in Breton, while not forgetting to make a detour to the National Shire Horse Society's centenary show. Another decade on, and she returned for the 750th anniversary of our cathedral. She also opened the Edith Cavell Hospital, now Peterborough City Hospital. Her final visit was to the East of England show, where over 3,000 visitors made their way through the turnstiles, an extra 3,000, to catch a glimpse of Her Majesty. Sadly, she will never return. I find it difficult to put into words. It feels like losing a family member, even though I never met her. The institution is far more than the individual, but the crown was greater for resting on her head. No monarch brought such selfless dedication to the role asked of them. Few before held the strings to our country's heart. With Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, the most tangible connection to our history is gone. But with His Majesty the King, Charles III, her legacy will continue long into our future. Peterborough proudly proclaims, through its tears, God save the King.
Anecdotes, Jones.
Diolch, Mr Deputy Speaker. I am saddened but truly grateful and humbled to have the opportunity to add to my tributes here today to commemorate the extraordinary life of Her Royal Highness Queen Elizabeth II on behalf of my constituents and my community in Pontypridd and Taffili. May I first echo the sentiments of colleagues across the benches in offering my sincere condolences to the royal family and to all who knew and loved her. While we all know what it may feel like to lose someone close, it is difficult to comprehend the loss of such a central figure, knowing fully well the whole world outside is watching. Mr Deputy Speaker, I share the sentiments of a huge number of local residents who have been in touch to share their sorrow at the news of Her Majesty's passing, mainly my mum, but then she did name me Alexandra Mary. Many of my constituents also have great pride in working at the Royal Mint in Llantrisant, and they have spent their working lives ensuring her portrait is nothing short of picture perfect on all of the coins in our pockets. They have expressed their admiration for Her Royal Highness's lifetime of dedicated public service and her commitment and devotion to this great nation. As history's longest-serving monarch, Her Majesty played an incredibly important role in uniting the nation through turbulent times. Her Majesty loved this country, she loved Wales, and we all loved her in return, which is why we all grieve today and for what I imagine will be some time to come. All of us here in the UK and across the Commonwealth are indebted to Her Majesty. We have so much to be grateful to her for. And for that I say thank you. Diolch yn fawr, Mam. Her Majesty was committed to the demands of duty, the sacrifices of service, and understood the responsibility bestowed upon her. Listening to colleagues across the House today recount stories and tales of meeting Her Majesty in person, I too would like to share with you all my most cherished memory of my encounter with the late Queen. As a little girl who always dreamed, like so many, of one day becoming a princess, having the privilege of singing for Her Majesty as part of her Golden Jubilee tour in Trehavard is a day I shall never forget. Waving my paper flag a dry goch, belting out Calon Lan with Hoyle, and getting to see with my own eyes the actual, real-life Queen was nothing short of magical. She had a natural sparkle, a wicked sense of humour, and the ability to make everyone she spoke to, waved at, or simply smiled at, feel like they had the most treasured interaction. We may never see another monarch like her. As a nation, we will miss Her Majesty enormously. May she rest in peace and rise in glory. God save the King, and God bless the new Prince and Princess of Wales.
Edwards.
Grief is the price we pay for love, Mr Deputy Speaker, as the Queen herself so memorably said. And as I laid flowers outside Buckingham Palace this morning, I was struck by the scale of the grief felt at her passing. For as my honourable friend, the member for Loughborough, has said, the greater the love, the greater the grief. In some ways, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Queen was an ordinary woman, a person like us. She loved dogs, marching about in wellies, horse racing, a gin and dubonnet, a good wind-up, and sporting the ultimate rainbow-hued wardrobe. If I wore beige, no one would know who I was, she is reported to have said. Like us, she suffered grief, loss, and family troubles, but had to endure them being played out on the pages of the world's press. She did so with great dignity. We felt we could relate to her, that we knew her, even though many of us may never have met her. She held a special place in our hearts. And in many ways, of course, the Queen was also an extraordinary woman. There can't be many who can pull off walking in a 1 kilogram crown, but also claim to know their way around a car engine, or who have let Brian May serenade them from the roof of their house. Few could have provided such stability and reassurance through 7 decades of the greatest social, economic and technological change, adapting to that change without letting it change her. Her reign saw the first man on the moon, the invention of the internet, When she ascended the throne, Great Britain had an empire. When she passed away, she was the head of a family of nations. And she was head of our national family. Constituents in Rushcliffe have told me her loss feels personally, more perhaps than they imagined. Whatever our politics or creed, from the youngest to the oldest, from the most remote corners of our islands to the bustle and clatter of our biggest cities, the Queen bound us together, the thread through our national story. In triumph, she was our anthem, through trials, our strength, her courage and steadfastness an example to us all. Who will ever forget her message to the nation at the height of the coronavirus pandemic, her reassurance that we would meet again. And we meet here today to remember a woman who lit people's faces with joy, to remember a sovereign whose reign is one of the greatest in history, and to remember a public servant who gave her whole life to us, her people, her country and her Commonwealth, right until the very end.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Throughout her extraordinary reign, Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was a beacon of stability, duty and selflessness, and many of my constituents in St Albans will find it impossible to imagine Britain's public life without her. On a personal level, I met the Queen a number of times when I worked in Commonwealth affairs trying to advance democracy and human rights. The Queen wasn't just a constant, but a few times a year she was literally part of the day job. Commonwealth Heads of Government meetings, Commonwealth Youth meetings, the annual multi-faith, interfaith Commonwealth Day service and reception. The Queen and Commonwealth were inseparable, the only modern intergovernmental organisation like it. Each year, we Commonwealth Secretariat staffers used to love celebrating the diversity of the Commonwealth on Commonwealth Day, but sometimes it was slightly surreal. The annual Commonwealth Day reception at the Secretariat was rumoured to be the only event in the Queen's diary where she didn't know who she was going to meet. There was no official line-up, it was all organic, not organised, and there was no protocol on ordering people and guests by rank or into different rooms. As a result, it was not unusual to see the Queen greeting a disorganised throng of diplomats, high commissioners, often with their husbands and wives, jostling to a backdrop of Fijian dancers in coconut bras, Ghanaian acrobats, and British pop stars from the 1980s, all jockeying for position to get a glimpse of the Queen or to shake her hand. On another day, I was tasked with taking a group of dignitaries to Buckingham Palace for an audience with Her Majesty. One such dignitary had just got a new smartphone, and he was particularly keen on telling all the other group members about the merits of this phone in spectacular levels of detail. When we arrived at the palace, we were all told, quite rightly, to turn our phones onto silent and to put them away. But during our polite conversation with the Queen, this particular person tried to persuade Her Majesty that she should get a phone just like his. So he proceeded to take his phone out of his pocket, started pressing buttons and thrust it under her nose. And he plucked up the courage to say, "Your Majesty, I think you should get a phone like mine." We all stood there, stunned in silence, and she just said, "Who do you expect me to text?" It was fantastic. He blushed like a schoolboy. The one-liner was wildly refreshing, and the rest of the group were incredibly grateful. I know that so many people who have met the Queen have many memories and stories to share, including many of my own constituents. And many of them will remember the 3 occasions that the Queen has visited our St Albans Cathedral and Abbey, where a book of condolence is now open. The Queen's passing feels like an end of an era, but on behalf of myself and my constituents in St Albans, I would like to extend my thoughts and prayers to the royal family. Rest in peace, Your Majesty, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise to speak on behalf of my constituents in West Dorset, to pay tribute to our late Queen, whom we have loved and admired for our entire lives, to share in the deepest sorrow of the nation, and to send our deepest sympathy to King Charles and the royal family. Queen Elizabeth has been one of the few constants in our transitory life. The past 24 hours has truly brought home to us not only the life and service of our Queen, but also our own service to our community and nation. Queen Elizabeth was a woman of great kindness and faith, of incredible inspiration, of steadfast leadership, and was a family role model for all of us. The Queen was of my grandparents' generation. Their sense of selfless service and duty, particularly during times of difficulty, has allowed us to lead the lives of freedom and democracy that we enjoy today. Her late Majesty's generation is one of selflessness, not of entitlement. Her generation is one of tenacity, of character, and of wisdom that we must look to continue in our own lives. And since my own grandparents passed away, I and so many have looked upon our Queen as the grandmother of the nation. And that is why the loss we feel is so sad and so difficult to describe. I am not able to put it better than Martin Lee, the rector of Sherborne this morning, when he said, "Our country has been held in her hands. With gentleness and firmness, she has never let go, always putting the needs of the nation before herself." In West Dorset, we have the fondest memories of many occasions that the late Queen Elizabeth visited us. First in 1952 in our county town of Dorchester, she visited my hometown of Sherborne twice, once in 1998 when the Queen unveiled the Great West Window at Sherborne Abbey, and again as part of the Queen's Diamond Jubilee tour in 2012, returning to Dorchester in 2016 to open Queen Mother Square in Poundbury. Those fond memories have endured with us for many years and will continue to do so. We, the people of West Dorset, and the citizens of the United Kingdom mourn our Queen. But our new King and his family are mourning his mother. It is therefore with profound affection and the greatest sympathy from West Dorset that I wish His Majesty the King to know that he, the royal family, and the late Queen Elizabeth remain steadfastly in our thoughts and prayers at this very sad time. God save the King.
Yeah. Gerald Jones.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. On behalf of myself, my family and my constituents in the County Borough of Merthyr Tydfil and the Upper Rumney Valley, I send my sincere condolences to His Majesty the King and all members of the royal family. As we know and as we've heard, most of our fellow citizens have known no other monarch. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has been an ever-present rock of stability throughout our country, the Commonwealth and around the world. Her presence has indeed been the glue holding our country together for so long. And as we've heard, it's so difficult to think of our country without her. I feel there is no greater example of unstinting and exemplary public service anywhere. We have been so lucky to have lived during these times, to have witnessed her service, her grace, her dignity, which was an example to us all. We will undoubtedly never see her like again. From an early age, Her Majesty followed her parents' example of duty that was so important in holding the country together during World War II. For over 70 years, she has been a constant. She has demonstrated a lifelong commitment to the service of the nation and Commonwealth. She was the longest reigning monarch in British history, the longest reigning female monarch, and the second longest serving monarch in world history. She served right to the very end, as she declared that she would do on her 21st birthday in 1947. Just a few short weeks ago, communities across all 4 nations of the United Kingdom and across her other realms, the Commonwealth and the world, were all celebrating the first ever Platinum Jubilee. I hope that as she appeared on the Buckingham Palace balcony for the last time and witnessed the outpouring on the Mall, that she was in no doubt just how much she was loved. I know that we all have examples of Her Majesty's links to our communities, and in my constituency, the most poignant is the community of Aberfan, a place where her late Majesty visited following the tragedy in 1966 and visited a number of times during her reign, something that was a comfort to many in the village and beyond. Her last visit to the community was part of her Diamond Jubilee tour in 2012, when she opened the brand new Annis Owen Primary School. So, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the people across my constituency, I say thank you for your life of service, ma'am. May you rest in eternal peace and rise in glory, and God save the Queen, and God bless the new Prince and Princess of Wales.
Secretary Batty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And that was an excellent tribute, like so many tributes today. And it just goes to show how we're all united in our grief. The heartfelt speeches from across the House have echoed the pain and sorrow which has been felt across the country and the Commonwealth since that devastating news yesterday. On behalf of my constituents in Meriden, I'd like to express my heartfelt condolences to the royal family as they mourn the loss of a beloved mother, grandmother and a great-grandmother. Our nation weeps with them and for them. And Her Majesty does hold a special place in the hearts of my constituents, because for it was on a spring morning in 1971 when Her Majesty opened Chelmsley Wood Shopping Centre, and most of the village of Chelmsley Wood turned out to greet her. In fact, that day the royal party was running on a late schedule, but the Queen was undeterred, and she took her time to speak to local residents. That same day, the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh were also shown the proposed site of the National Exhibition Centre. They would return 5 years later, in 1976, to open the NEC, where excited members of staff stood in a line to greet Her Majesty. And this is particularly apt because the NEC was a major venue for the Commonwealth Games. Her Majesty always demonstrated kindness, generosity and dedication. And I have my own experience of this, because in March 2007, when I was finishing off my degree at the London School of Economics, I was invited to meet Her Majesty on Commonwealth Day. I was nervous and I was excited, and she was very gracious with her time. And it was only later when I asked a friend, how did I do? He said, you said a lot, but none of it made any sense. I hope my tribute is better today, but Her Majesty never let on and wished me all the best in my endeavours. For decades, Her Majesty has been a cool-headed, constant steward of our great nation. She was always there when we needed her. She showed us what it meant to keep calm and carry on. I'll never forget how in the pandemic, she gave reassurance to the whole nation and told us that we would meet again. We were blessed to have her, and she really was the best of us. She lived a dedicated life of service and devotion to her husband, her family, her country, and the Commonwealth. And every single one of us in this house would do well to emulate her lifetime of selflessness and public service. Today, we mourn a monarch and we pray for her. And as we reflect on her legacy and we look to the future, I say only this: may she rest in peace, may we always be grateful to have experienced her reign. To God we belong and to God we return. God save the King.
Chris Law.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow the delightful tribute given to the Queen by Right Honourable Member from Meriden. On behalf of myself, my constituents in Dundee West, and all peoples of the Royal Ancient Borough of Dundee, I'd like to pay tribute to Her Majesty the Queen and send my deepest condolences to the royal family at this difficult time. Her Majesty dedicated her life to public service, and having acceded to the throne at an unexpected young age, she has reshaped the monarchy in the changing generations that she has reigned, and she'll be remembered in history as Britain's longest-serving monarch. Throughout her reign, she served with dignity and compassion. Everyone that I know personally that has met her has spoken of her real and genuine warmth. The Queen, of course, had a strong Scottish heritage. The Queen Mother's home was Glamis Castle in Angus, not far from my city of Dundee. As a result, Her Majesty frequently visited her maternal grandparents there as a child. Indeed, one of the earliest photographs of the Queen visiting Dundee is as a child shopping in Webster's toy shop in Whitehall Crescent with her grandmother, the Countess of Strathmore. Throughout her lifetime, she continued to visit my city, and many of Dundee's parks and public spaces were officially opened by Her Majesty. As then Princess, she officially opened Camperdown Park in 1946, and 7 decades later, 70 years, she unveiled a plaque to officially open Slessor Gardens at our city's redeveloped waterfront in 2016. Buckingham Palace was, of course, not the only balcony that the Queen waved from. In 1969, she arrived by train into Dundee and visited Dudhope Court, one of the city's 44 multi-storey blocks. While there, she was welcomed by a local Dundee family and waved from their balcony to the crowds that gathered below. I'm also told that she stayed back for a cup of tea. Thousands of people gathered to watch the Royal Yacht Britannia berth in the city when she made her first royal visit to Dundee as Queen in 1955 with the Duke of Edinburgh, and I know that thousands will now wish to sign the book of condolence that has been opened at Dundee City Chambers to allow members of the public the chance to express their feelings at the death of Her Majesty. She will always be remembered in Dundee, in Scotland, the Commonwealth and the world for her unwavering service that has never ceased until the end. Thank you, ma'am, and may you rest in peace.
David Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. When the announcement was made yesterday of Her Majesty passing, my tears started immediately. There's been lots of euphemisms for that in the House this afternoon, but I cried in the way that I would someone that I was close to. And of course, I'd never met her. I wish I had met her. I'd once been in the same room. That was as close as I got, but it was too big a room. There were too many people. She entered at the opposite end to where I was, and everybody swarmed, and I didn't stand a chance. But I did have the privilege of meeting two members of her family, including our new king, who spoke so movingly earlier this evening. And in them, we saw what she had inculcated in her family and in the nation. We saw the example that she set. And it's no surprise that the same words are used over and over again in the tributes about duty and sacrifice and dedication and selflessness. She personified them. But we have also heard about passion. We've heard about her passion, of course, for her family, for her country, for horse racing, for her dogs, but about humour, about mischief, which we saw at the Olympics and which we saw quite recently in the Platinum Jubilee celebrations with Paddington Bear. And in those celebrations, which were just a few weeks ago, of course, we all rise to speak on behalf of our constituents. And my constituents in Wantage and Didcot showed the great love and devotion they had to her, with street parties all across the 4 towns and 64 villages I represent. Far too many for me to get to all of them, although I tried to do my best. We have been blessed, and it's a constituency with a long royal history, the birthplace of Alfred the Great. And we have been blessed with visits, like every other part of the country, to Wallingford, to Harwell, to open the Diamond Light Source. However good any of us think we are at visiting things in our constituency, none of us are anything like Her Majesty in 70 years of day after day visiting things, openings, ceremonies. At the peak, she was patron of more than 600 charities that she supported. And we have lost the most impressive servant to our nation that we will ever see. And we should be forever thankful for what she has given to us. And Mr. Speaker, Winston Churchill, and in saying that, that should give you an indication of how early that was in her reign. But Winston Churchill said, if all the film people in all the world, if they scoured the globe, would not find someone as suited to the part. How true that was. May she rest in peace, and God save the King.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to pay tribute to Her late Majesty the Queen on behalf of myself and my constituents of Enfield Southgate. In our grief, we remember a lifetime dedicated to extraordinary public service. Her steadfast commitment to the values of duty, public service and family provided comfort to so many here and around the world. And my thoughts and condolences and those of my constituents are with the King and the royal family at this most difficult time. As we all know, the Queen was the one constant in our lives. At times of incredible change, at times of crises, and during good times too, she was Britain's reassuring and constant presence. In 1953, the whole country joined in celebration to mark the Queen's coronation. In Enfield Southgate, I'm reliably informed there were many local events to mark the occasion, including a local parade, procession and athletics games in Broomfield Park. Footage from this time is incredibly poignant after Thursday's news, but also after this summer's Platinum Jubilee, where communities were able to come together once again to celebrate the Queen. In 1953, the Queen's coronation speech was broadcast over loudspeakers in Broomfield Park, but because of the rain, many listened at home on the radio. This summer, we had no such problems. We had street parties across the borough with bake-offs and crown competitions, and it was wonderful to bring the community together in this way 70 years later. Now, today, those events are all the more moving as we pay tribute to the Queen's life and her service to our country. And I'm sure we will see the same sense of togetherness again as the nation mourns over the coming days. As our longest ever serving monarch, Like most of us, I do not remember a time before Queen Elizabeth II. In this time, she saw 15 Prime Ministers, but somehow managed to stay above party politics. As we know in this House, that is no mean feat. And for 70 years, she embodied and represented the nation with an unwavering duty on the international stage, a symbol of stability when things were changing. The outpouring of emotion internationally we have seen since the news is a testament to her success in achieving this. She was not just well regarded, but loved around the world. And this is something that I've witnessed again and again while meeting foreign representatives from other nations, who without fail will always pay tribute to the Queen. And those who had the pleasure of meeting her will always share stories of her kindness and warmth and her sense of humour. As we remember Her late Majesty, I will personally remember how she continued to serve her country with duty and kindness until the very end. The Queen was an example for us all. May she rest in peace. God save the King.
Richard Cairns.
I rise to express the admiration and deep love of the people of Rutland, Melton, the Vale and Harbour villages for Her Majesty and our heartfelt sympathies to the royal family. Since her death, our communities have been sharing their stories of her and their love, and we have been blessed with 3 visits. First in 1967, where she travelled on the royal train with her beloved Philip. 3,000 children awaited her, and she visited our Oakham Castle. There she presented a ceremonial horseshoe, because our tradition is the first time a peer of the realm or a majesty or any member of the royal family visits our county, they must present a horseshoe. She gave us an enormous horseshoe, and in the heart of it, a small horseshoe from one of her racehorses, which was very touching. It now hangs upside down, which some say is unlucky, but in Rutland we say it will stop the devil from bedding in, and it is now on display in our castle. The second time in 1984, where she visited Uppingham and Oakham schools, and the Hospital St John and St Anne, and finally in 1996, where to enormous crowds, she visited Melton Mowbray, walking up Nottingham Street, and of course she did stop at Ye Old Pork Pie Shop. She then finished her visit by going to RAF Cottesmore, and these visits remain in the hearts of our communities. I have to confess that over the last few days, it feels a lot longer, doesn't it? It was only yesterday. My tears have fallen most when there have been stories of joy shared, because I think then it is that we see the great love that we feel for her. But it was also when His Majesty uses the word mama, which I think touched so many of us. But I also believe that this Christmas we will all shed tears again, because no Christmas will ever be the same again, and I hope we will all raise a drink for her at Christmas. But finally, my overriding memory of yesterday, and one that will save me for my life, is that double rainbow that we saw. And the reason for that is I see it as a sign of Her Majesty returning to her love, to Philip, to the side of her beloved husband, and him showing her the way. Because, Mr. Speaker, as with all ages of history, the end of an era brings a new dawn. And on behalf of all the people of Rutland and Melton, I say simply, thank you, Ma'am, and God save the King.
Stephen Kinner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today on behalf of the people of Aberavon to pay tribute to our late Queen and to send my deepest sympathy and condolences to the royal family at this time of loss and grief. The Queen will always be remembered by our nation and by the world as the epitome of loyalty, humility and grace. She always put service to her country above all else, and we shall never forget her duty-first, no-nonsense approach to everything that she did. Her unique talent lay in her ability to connect with the nation and to reflect our thoughts, our hopes and our fears. She inspired affection and respect, and she was a source of comfort to us all. The last 7 decades have been times of seismic political, economic and social change. And throughout these turbulent years, Her Majesty was a beacon of consistency and stability. She never failed to steady the ship. She was the personification of keeping calm and carrying on. Indeed, her leadership during the pandemic was testament to this. In echoing the immortal words made famous by Dame Vera Lynn, "We will meet again," she evoked in her typically understated manner the stoic spirit and measured optimism that guided us through that period of crisis and hardship. On behalf of my Aberavon constituents, I thank the Queen for all that she gave to our country, and I convey my very best wishes to King Charles as he assumes his new responsibilities and begins writing the next chapter in our national story. Long live the King, and long live the Prince and Princess of Wales.
Marco Longi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Her Majesty the Queen has been a given in our lives, an anchor, as certain as the sun setting each day, but her star has set for one final time, and there is no worldly scale big enough to show the weight of our loss. I, like many, felt that she would always be there. On behalf of my Dudley North constituents, I wish to express my sincere and deepest sympathies to His Majesty, the royal family, and indeed the entirety of the royal household. Mr. Speaker, Her Majesty embodied everything we all aspire to stand for in this place: dedication to public service, dedication to family, dedication to people. The magnitude of what Her Majesty delivered in her time for us all is impossible to measure, and while I never had the privilege of meeting her, I felt a presence there, a guiding hand, one that was available to us all, including Paddington Bear. In Dudley North, I mourn alongside my constituents, a community united in grief. Her Majesty first visited Dudley in 1957 as a relatively new monarch to view the beautiful coronation gardens dedicated to her, which coincidentally my constituency office overlooks, so I will always have a physical reminder to follow her example of dedication and public service. Fast forward some decades to the 70s, but ultimately the 90s, and Her Majesty found herself in Dudley once again, although a little higher in altitude at Dudley Castle and Zoo, making her the first monarch to visit the castle since her namesake, Elizabeth I, in 1575. Her Majesty was given a tour of the centre before unveiling a piece of commemorative glass and receiving a crystal key to the castle as a gift of the borough. Many of the messages I have received are those of constituents reminiscing her visit. It is clear she left a lasting impression. What is also clear is that when God made our Queen, He certainly broke the mould. We all take comfort in coming together to remember the guiding light Her Majesty has been to us all. Long live the King.
Ellen Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As one of the most recent MPs to swear allegiance to the Queen, I'm saddened and humbled to have the honour of paying tribute to her once again on behalf of my North Shropshire constituents. And on behalf of them, I offer my condolences to the King and to the rest of the royal family for their sad loss today. Many constituents have been in touch over the last 24 hours to share their sense of love, their sense of loss, but most of all, their gratitude for the Queen's devotion, her leadership and her warmth during her 70 years of public service. While the nation is united in sorrow, the anecdotes shared here today and by my constituents from North Shropshire have shown me that, as well as the sorrow, we can celebrate her life with joy as we remember her today. I've smiled as some of the more senior of my neighbours have shared memories of the coronation back in 1953. These memories are vivid and are still fondly thought of 7 decades on. Every television wheeled out so that neighbours, friends and family members could huddle together for a glimpse of the gracious young Queen, and a whole programme of celebrations in the town of Wem, at which I was recently shown an original programme in perfect condition. I'm thankful that the Platinum Jubilee provided the chance for these communities to unite once again and show the Queen just how much she was loved and continued to be into her 70th year. She was celebrated across North Shropshire, from the soldiers of the Royal Irish Regiment based at Turnhill to the helicopter pilots being trained at RAF Shawbury, including her grandsons, the new Prince of Wales and Prince Harry a decade ago. We're very grateful to have welcomed her to both sites. But from Wem to Whitchurch, Ellesmere to Oswestry and Market Drayton, we lit beacons across the countryside as a symbol of gratitude to our longest-serving monarch. And how appropriate this was, for Queen Elizabeth was a beacon of stability to us all throughout these 7 decades. But now a new era begins. Christmas this year will be very different. We will gather round our televisions again, but this time it will be the speech of King Charles III, and not that of our Queen. In North Shropshire, we will raise a glass to both of them. In 1957, the 31-year-old Queen promised to give these old islands her heart and devotion. She stayed true to her word for every minute of her 96 years, and for this we are all grateful. We hope she rests in peace. God save the King.
Sarah Bretland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I just want to join colleagues in expressing my deepest sorrow at the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II and the sorrow of my constituents of Hyndburn and Haslingden. Our condolences are with the King and the royal family. It's difficult to be able to put into words the grief and profound loss that is felt, but after the rainbows that's been mentioned, as I paid my own tribute last night at the gates of Buckingham Palace in the darkness, the heavens had opened and the rain poured. It felt as though the weather portrayed our grief. The nation's heart was broken. For many of us, the Queen is the only monarch we've known. It's hard to underestimate the value of the stability she gave this country and the nations around the world for which she was head of state. When our politics or our society seemed so fraught, the Queen was a constant in our lives, a reminder of strength, dignity and stability, a reminder of what unites us. In 2012, we had the privilege of a royal visit from Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth and the Duke of Edinburgh during her Diamond Jubilee. I remember my own personal memory of that day stood on the balcony of Accrington Market Hall at the age of 17 years old, outside my dad's cafe, Millie's, as she came to greet us. Her eyes twinkled and her warmth shone through. The crowds gathered in the thousands. They smiled, they sang, and one feeling that could be felt within the crowd: they loved. During her 1957 Christmas address, the Queen said that while she cannot lead us into battle, give us laws or administer justice, she could give us her heart and her devotion. All these years later, we can surely all agree that she did just that. She was our greatest public servant, our greatest diplomat, and our stability. She has been the true light in our lives that none of us really believed would ever go out. May she now rest in peace. Thank you, ma'am, and God save the King.
Christian Wake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm both proud and sorrowed, although delighted to follow my honourable friend, and I emphasise that word friend because grief does bring people together. I imagine I speak for many when I say I've taken some solace in hearing some of the tributes today from those who've actually got to meet and know Her Majesty. I was never fortunate enough to have met her, but it almost feels like I had, just like everyone else in this chamber, because there was something similar and familiar to all of us, and we all take a bit of her with us. But I like to think that bit I take is the humility and the kindness that everyone speaks about. This great and proud country went through many trials and tribulations during the Elizabethan age, but she was one of the constant, providing stability through wartime as much as in peace. And as many have already alluded to, regardless of your political views, her sense of service to this country she loved is something to be admired, treasured, and something we should all be proud of. I know what I was doing when I was 25 years of age, and I know I would not have been able to take on the responsibility of a country, let alone a whole host of them, like a Commonwealth. I certainly couldn't have helped strip an engine either. But I'd also like to put on the record the condolences of my constituency of Bury South, the townships of Radcliffe, Whitefield and Prestwich, along with myself and my family. And I particularly think to this year's Jubilee celebrations, when my daughter, at nursery at the time, came back home from nursery so proud that she had learnt the national anthem. So she did her rendition for Daddy, and she sang "God Save Our Normal Queen." Unfortunately, Lavinia, the words weren't quite right, but the sentiment was there. She was no stranger to Bury either, was Her Majesty, visiting as a young girl herself in 1938, and visited a further 6 times after that, with her most recent visit in 1992, where she opened St. Peter's Square Metrolink station and took a ride to visit Bury Town Hall, which she had opened 38 years prior. What stood out for me most, though, about her service wasn't just for the length of what she did, it's for the fact she seemed to genuinely enjoy every single moment of it. From historical meetings with world leaders right down to visiting primary school children, She made everyone feel like they were the only person meeting her. She was a mother, a grandmother, a great-grandmother, a wife, a sister, a rock to the nation, but more importantly, a grandmother to the nation. She was all sorts to everyone, but she was always a queen. The saddest thing is that there are children born today that will never know a queen, let alone the queen. Finally, I think all of my constituents will agree with one simple message. Thank you, Ma'am. May our Queen rest in peace and long live the King.
Instincts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I rise in deep sadness, but with immense gratitude for the life and the service of our beloved late Sovereign Queen Elizabeth. I firstly want to place on record the love and respect of my constituents in Wolverhampton North East for Her Majesty. Many have already contacted me about the devastating sense of loss and grief they feel at Her Majesty's passing, and I thank them for sharing their thoughts with me. It is an honour to pass them on in this place. It's extraordinary that so many of us who never met Queen Elizabeth can be so affected by her death, but for everyone in Wolverhampton, in the United Kingdom and across the Commonwealth, she was a huge presence in our lives. The Queen visited Wolverhampton several times to our schools, our factories, and I think my favourite story is from a visit before I was born in 1962, her first visit to Molyneux. She was presenting colours to the North and South Staffordshire regiments and the Staffordshire Yeomanry, and she did apologise to Wolverhampton Wanderers for her high heels making marks on our hallowed turf at Molyneux. 30,000 Wolverinians cheered her that day, and I know the strength of feeling for our monarch is still as deep today as it was then. For millions of us, Her Majesty was a constant presence at so many events in our lives, and every Christmas, I, like millions of people, felt the Queen was in my living room when surrounded by my family. We waited for her words every year, words of wisdom, of comfort. Last year, at her last Christmas address, she spoke about her upcoming Platinum Jubilee and how she hoped it would be an opportunity for people everywhere to enjoy a sense of togetherness. At so many Jubilee events for Her Majesty, my neighbours became my friends, and she certainly succeeded at all the events I attended in Wolverhampton this year for her Platinum Jubilee. She brought us all together. Because of Her Majesty's age and because we knew she was struggling with some ill health, I think the celebrations this year were poignant as well as joyful, and I'm sure I'm not the only person who, through our smiles, also shed a tear when Paddington Bear thanked Her Majesty for everything. She has united our nation once again, and this sad occasion, she now unites us in national mourning. Our thoughts must be for her beloved family, the royal family, and especially our new King Charles III, as he takes on such responsibility. I hope the outpouring of love for Her late Majesty will bring the royal family some comfort over the coming days and weeks. I want to express immense gratitude for her life, her many qualities. She was a shining example of strength and of selflessness in public service. May our beloved Queen Elizabeth rest in peace and rise in glory. God save the King.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This day is a day many of us which will never come, but many of us believe will also never happen. I need not remind members of Her late Majesty's unwavering service as Britain's longest-serving monarch, her calmness and stoicism through difficult times, and the continuity and stability she offered our country and our people. She personified the virtues of loyalty and humility, never complaining, and setting a towering example for world leaders, future monarchs, and ordinary people alike. Her Majesty was the embodiment of our nation's identity, and for many people, she was the United Kingdom, with the uncanny ability to appear unchanging, yet also move with the times. She epitomised the concept of a constitutional monarch and took this responsibility seriously, thus cementing the role of the constitutional monarchy in this country. Remaining above politics is imparting profound wisdom to innumerable prime ministers and parliamentarians over several decades. But it was not her constitutional link to the lawmakers of this land that made her one of the greatest monarchs in our history, but it was her affinity with every single man, woman and child in Britain and across the Commonwealth. Nowhere is this better exemplified than during her visits, for it was in places like Rother Valley that Her Majesty excelled. Her visit to Rother Valley in 1977 was an unrivaled success. She was greeted by over 7,000 children from across Rother Valley at Maltby Comprehensive School, and on the Maltby Fields, more than 20 schools and youth organisations put on displays. Countless Rother Valley children would cherish the memories of this visit, but my favourite story is about a 10-year-old girl from Letwell who was dressed in a purple velvet cloak with a plea for the Queen written on a cardboard sign. It read, "Dear Queen of England, please crown me Queen of Aston French School, love Alison." As the Queen passed, she duly obliged. Taking the sign, Her Majesty asked Alison, "So you want to be crowned, do you?" Then, carefully picking up the homemade crown, held on a velvet cushion by Alison's page boy, a 7-year-old boy called Matthew Alton from Woodhouse Mill, Her Majesty regally placed it on Alison's head, thus crowning her the Queen of Aston Fence School. But this anecdote, like many across the country, encapsulates what Her Majesty meant to Rother Valley, the United Kingdom and the world. Despite all the grandeur, the pomp and the ceremony, and the serious constitutional role she played, Her Majesty's most winning qualities were humour, her kindness, and a famous mischievous twinkle in her eye. She was a cultural icon, but beneath it all, she was the nation's grandmother. She loved all of us and was beloved by all of us in return. I send my deepest condolences to the royal family on behalf of my own family, Natalie, Persephone, Charlotte, and of all the people of Rother Valley. Eternal rest grant upon her, O Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon her. May she rest in peace. And I offer my humble allegiance and loyalty to His Majesty King Charles III. God save the King.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Her late Majesty was always warmly welcome to Northampton, and so the town mourns her passing most sincerely. Looking over some of the old coverage of royal visits to Northampton since the sad news yesterday, it's clear how much joy she brought on every occasion. So many speakers from across the House have succeeded in communicating the almost magical combination of majesty and personable friendliness, and yet within that one was always aware of her sheer presence. Presence even stood in a lay-by with my dear mother, Mrs. Sandra Lewis, as an infant in 1977, waving a dock leaf and getting a wave from the limousine in return. Two of the occasions upon which I met Her Majesty illustrate this duality. The 800th anniversary of the Maundy service in 2010, where she presented the ceremonial money to another inspirational woman, the late Sister Merle Wilde, one of the last of the Methodist Order of Deaconesses. Tradition, dignity, majesty. The Diamond Jubilee 2 years later, there I met Her Majesty at a much less formal event. And when introduced, I found myself, for reasons too obscure to detain the House with tonight, talking to her about donuts. Her Majesty took it in typically good part, thankfully, but I sensed rather than saw a certain look between the then Lord Lieutenant, also thankfully a friend of mine, and my wife, who had much to say about this afterwards. Personable, cheerful, filled with humanity. Blending this with her dignity and bearing was brilliantly described as alchemy by a colleague earlier today. So I thank you, Mr. Speaker and Mr. Deputy Speaker, for your indulgence tonight. It really is appreciated, and that of the House staff as well. It's meant a lot to us to be able to do this evening. And in conclusion, may God bless Her Majesty the Queen and keep her safe, and God save the King.
Jerome May.
Speaker, I add my name to the outpouring of love, affection and gratitude for the life of Her late Majesty on behalf of the people of Broadland. It's a sombre day as we grieve. So who would have thought that we would have laughed so much as we've remembered her extraordinary life? I've loved listening to the speeches of colleagues as they've recalled their mishaps with Her Majesty. And through those stories, I've learnt so much about her deep graciousness. I have never been lucky enough to meet her, but I still grew up with her as part of my family, for that was the impact of her life on all of us. Through her service, she reached into our homes and our hearts. Whatever else was going on in our lives or in the country, the Queen was always there, a steadfast anchor of rightness. She did not represent the people, she embodied them through her steady, selfless service, year after year, decade after decade. By her life and how she lived it, she pointed out to all of us the real values by which life should be lived: integrity, devout faithfulness, duty. We, in return, have demanded constant attention, constant attendance, constant access, irrespective of any difficulties in her own life, often demanding the most at the hardest times. And yet, she never faltered, never stepped back, stayed true to her young oath. What a wonderful woman. What a wonderful monarch. Her heavy burden, which she somehow managed to wear so lightly, has now passed to the King. His wonderful speech to his peoples today shows how he has shouldered it. May she rest in peace. God save the King.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a solemn honour to rise in this debate to pay tribute to Her late Majesty the Queen, both personally and on behalf of my constituents in Hertford and Stortford. And it's humbling to follow so many very wonderful and fine tributes that we've heard throughout the day. The King himself, in his moving address, made reference to the speech many others in this chamber have mentioned, where his mother, the late Queen, made on her 21st birthday a declaration that her whole life, whether it be long or short, be devoted to our service. We know now that her life was long, and that for every day of her 70-year reign, she magnificently honoured that solemn vow. In that same speech, she also said, "I am thinking especially today of all the young men and women who were born about the same time as myself and have grown up like me in the terrible and glorious years of the Second World War." And it is also this, alongside her vow of devotion to duty, which resonates with me today. Perhaps it's because she was speaking about those like my own parents, now themselves in their 90s and children of the East End and of the Blitz. And I'm struck more than ever that Her late Majesty, both as a person and as a monarch, represents a link between our generations. She's a tangible human link to our nation's past, its struggles, but most of all to its finest hour. And she's also a link to our own individual pasts, our personal and our family's histories, and we've heard many of those stories here today. Her ability to evoke the spirit of what we rightly call the greatest generation gave us what, in my view, was the finest speech of the COVID crisis. She said that she hoped those who come after us will say that the Britons of this generation were as strong as any. And of course, she said we will meet again. Her late Majesty personified that link with our past and with the greatest generation. We shall not see her like again. Arthur Balfour was Prime Minister in 1901 and addressed this chamber on the death of Queen Victoria. He said then that the end of a great epoch has come upon us. With the passing of our Queen, the end of a great historical epoch has indeed passed. But we are all privileged to have lived at least some of our lives in the great second Elizabethan age. We mourn her, but we cherish her memory and her lifetime of service. God bless Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, and God save the King.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is humbling to take part in this very special session as we mourn Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. We have heard powerful tributes. We have heard wonderful words spoken. And as I have sat and reflected through what is coming on 10.5 hours of those wonderful tributes, the thought that actually there may not be the words in our language, there may not actually be the phrases powerful enough to express the sheer scale of the significance of the reign of Her late Majesty to our country, to the overseas territories, to the Commonwealth, and to the whole world. But on behalf of my constituents, the towns of Buckingham, Princes Risborough, Winslow, and the villages that surround those ancient market towns to make up the Buckingham constituency, I wish to pass on my condolences to the whole royal family, to our new King, His Royal Highness Charles III, to the new Prince of Wales, for the profound loss that they feel as a family and that we share as a nation. Her Majesty was gracious to visit my constituency on a great number of occasions as I look back through the history books. Special occasions that, when you look at the pictures, you see the joy on people's faces as she joined them, as she greeted them, be it a walkabout in the town of Buckingham, when she visited the University of Buckingham whilst Lady Thatcher was its Chancellor, her visit to Waddesdon, the pictures that hang on the newly reopened Stag pub in Mentmore of her visit to the village of Mentmore some time ago. You could see the joy in people's faces as she joined them. We have lost a most incredible lady, a world statesman, someone whose like I fear we will not see again. But from the great privilege of watching His Royal Highness King Charles III on the screen in this chamber earlier, I am full of hope and confidence that he will carry on her legacy, that he will be a great king. And so I say, on behalf of all of my constituents and myself, may Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II rest in peace, and God save the King.
Gibson.
Speaker, and thank you for your indulgence post 10 o'clock for those of us who've been here. It's really appreciated. It's a privilege to follow so many incredible tributes to Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth. She was a committed public servant, fulfilling her promise to our nation to serve us her whole life. Service that was delivered with honour, duty and integrity. She stood as an inspiration to us all. On behalf of the people of Darlington, I want to send sincere and heartfelt condolences to His Majesty, King Charles III, and the whole royal family. Throughout her long reign, Her late Majesty travelled more widely and met more people than any other monarch. And her travels included 2 visits to Darlington. The first, in 1967, Her late Majesty and the Duke of Edinburgh visited Darlington on the 100th anniversary of the town being awarded a royal charter by her great-great-grandmother, Queen Victoria, and at the time granted supporters on the town's coats of arms. At this time, there were plans to concrete over much of the town and remove much of its Victorian heritage. I understand that the royal party asked a number of probing questions of these plans, which included the removal of our clock tower, a clock tower which was inspired by the Elizabeth Tower of this palace. I am pleased to say that the plans were largely dropped and our clock tower still stands proudly over our town today. Her late Majesty returned to Darlington again in 2002 as part of her Golden Jubilee tour, and the town turned out in force to line the streets and welcome her. There were so many floral offerings that members of the Scouts were needed to help carry them all to the car. The crowds were so big that the palace issued a statement the following day, noting the unexpectedly large crowds in Darlington. The Queen was truly loved by the people of Darlington, and she will be deeply missed. Just yesterday morning at Auckland Castle, I attended a ceremony for the presentation of the Queen's Award for Voluntary Service to the community peer mentors in County Durham and Darlington, recognising the public service and duty in my constituency that Her late Majesty embodied. We mourn her, we miss her. Her place in history and her lasting legacies are rightly assured. Now reunited with her husband, may she rest in peace until she rises in glory again. God save the King.
Luke Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing us to sit late tonight. Bosworth has an affinity and eternal history with the monarchy. After all, we had the Battle of Bosworth in August 1485, where we saw the death of Richard III and the crowning of Henry VII. So my constituency has a palpable, visible history with the monarchy, and it's still there and proud today. And we've heard the description over and over of duty, and I challenge any member in this House to find a better person in British history that personifies duty. To me, it's Queen Elizabeth the Dutiful. Now, as a Member of Parliament, we have the honour of representing and reflecting the opinions and feelings of our constituents. And something that's never happened over 1,000 years of monarchy is the ability to feel that immediately due to social media. That is the chance for us to reflect the feelings of the nation. And I've been struck by a poem that's been sent to me by several constituents and many councillors, and I'm sure it will have graced your screens too, and I'd like to read it to you because it's visceral and encapsulates the feelings of the nation. Philip came to me today and said, "It's time to go." I looked at him and smiled, and as I whispered, "Yes, I know," I then turned and looked behind me and saw I was asleep. All the family were around me, and then I could hear them weep. I gently touched each shoulder with Philip by my side, and then I turned away and walked with my angel husband as a guide. Philip held my hand and he guided me on the way to a world where kings and queens are monarchs every day. I was given a crown to wear or a halo known by some. The difference is up here, they're worn by everyone. I felt a sense of peace. My reign had seen its end. 70 years I'd served my country as the people's dearest friend. Thank you for the years, for all your time and love. Now I am one of two again in our palace up above. Rest in peace, Your Majesty. Long live the King.
Sally Ann Parr.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on behalf of the people of Hastings and Rye, I express our sadness and grief at the death of our beloved Sovereign, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. Her late Majesty came to Hastings and St Leonard's 25 years ago, filling local residents with pride and joy, and she visited a number of places, including West St Leonard's Primary School, the Fisherman's Museum, and opened Priory Meadow Shopping Centre. She was presented with a winkle by the Winkle Club. Our Queen spent her whole life dedicated to her people of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth, a life she did not choose herself, but one which she was born to, and the burden of her birth was one which she carried so diligently, dutifully and lovingly, with the support of her faith in God, her beloved late husband Prince Philip, her family and her people. I want to thank Her late Majesty for her life of selfless public service, her love, her dedication, her stoicism. Her Majesty shone a light to us all, a light which gave comfort to those in need, a light which gave hope to those in despair, and a light of unity to all her peoples from across our 4 nations. She brought light where it was most needed, a beacon of stability to us in this place. And I speak on behalf of the people of Hastings and Rye when I express my deepest sorrow at Her Majesty's passing and extend our prayers for and condolences to her family, our royal family.
With his accession to the throne, His Majesty King Charles III will bring in a new era, and we offer him our loyalty and love for a long and happy reign. Long live the King.
Rob Butler.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the constituents of Aylesbury, I convey deepest condolences to His Majesty the King and all members of the royal family following the death of Her late Majesty the Queen. She played a huge part in the lives of each and every one of us. She was the constant through good times and bad, celebrations and crises. Her tireless dedication and unwavering service to our nation, her realms and the entire Commonwealth are unparalleled, and they will never be forgotten. Her late Majesty visited Aylesbury on several occasions during her 70 years on the throne. She came in 1962 as part of a celebration of the 10th anniversary of her accession, when pavements thronged with well-wishers and she popped into the homes of 2 residents. She visited again in 1969 to open Stoke Mandeville Stadium, the birthplace of the Paralympic movement. And Her Majesty came to Aylesbury once more to mark her Golden Jubilee in 2002. The love and affection that we feel for her in Buckinghamshire was vividly demonstrated across our county time and time again, and most recently during the Platinum Jubilee celebrations. Coming together for parades and picnics, dog shows, tugs of war, 3-legged races, from the youngest child to the most senior citizen, people the length and breadth of my constituency wanted to demonstrate their gratitude and appreciation for the commitment and duty shown by the Queen throughout her incredible reign. Mr. Speaker, my own memories of Her Majesty are, I suspect, very similar to those of the vast majority of the public, because I never met her. And yet, she was always there. I remember making a scrapbook on the Queen and her family for a Cub Scout badge, a tea party in my village for the Silver Jubilee, watching her name, HMS Duke of Lancaster in Glasgow, and seeing her on the royal barge during the Diamond Jubilee flotilla. Snatched glimpses, modest memories, yet the loss is still felt keenly. One singular honour that I was extremely fortunate to receive, though, Mr. Speaker, was to gain royal assent for a private member's bill I'd taken through this place. I was humbled to have that privilege just a few months ago with the passing into law of the Approved Premises Substance Testing Act, a prorogation. In some ways, the words La Reine le Vote are a small formality, but in others, they represent great moment, symbolising the relationship between Parliament and Sovereign, a relationship that we celebrate today. Mr. Speaker, we have heard wonderful and eloquent tributes, but no words will ever adequately encapsulate Her Majesty's reign, let alone the profound loss and deep sorrow that we feel today. Our nation is poorer for having lost her, but oh, how much richer for having known and loved her. May she rest in eternal peace. God save the King.
Tom Hunt.
Mr. Speaker, I think if one wanted to look at an example of how much affection the people of Ipswich had for Her late Majesty, you would have needed to have been in Ipswich on the weekend of the Jubilee. We've heard today that apparently there was the most parties in Twickenham than anywhere else in the country. Well, I'm not entirely sure about that. I'm not sure what the measurement was, but I think Ipswich is definitely strongly up there. All communities came together. I remember my Jubilee card competition. I thought my Christmas card competition was popular until I had the Jubilee card competition, where we had over 1,000 entries, and the winner from Ranelagh Primary School was incredibly proud to receive to have her card go to the Queen. Her late Majesty visited Ipswich many times, but there was 2 visits that really stand out for me. One of them was in 1961 to Chantry. At the time, it was a fledgling housing estate. It's now became the largest housing estate in Europe. It now is a community of 15 to 20,000 people, and it's a beating heart of Ipswich and our town. And I also think of 2002, her Golden Jubilee, where she visited the Ipswich waterfront. That just indicates how much the town has changed in her reign, and also her uncanny ability to time her visits, which gave a sense to the people of Ipswich. She was monitoring closely the town's development and cared passionately about her subjects who lived within that town, and that care and love was reciprocated. I must admit, Mr. Speaker, that I'm a big fan of I Vow to Thee My Country. I'm also a big fan of Jerusalem. On occasion, I have speculated that perhaps those anthems should have been our national anthem. Right now, Mr. Speaker, there is nothing I wouldn't give just to have sung God Save the Queen a few more times, maybe a few more years. Nothing I wouldn't have done. But right now we need to ask ourselves what Her late Majesty would want us to do. And what she'd want us to do is unify as a country and come face the challenges ahead. And she'd want us to proudly say, God save the King. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Dr. Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak on behalf of my constituents in Runnymede and Weybridge as we and the nation mourns. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was an inspirational figure who embodied selfless service. She provides stability, support and succour in challenging times. Runnymede and Weybridge has the privilege to be neighbour to her home in Windsor, and my constituency is adorned with plaques inscribed with her name. We have a statue of Her Majesty at the Runnymede Pleasure Grounds, unveiled at the 800th anniversary of Magna Carta, which shows just how far we've come in Runnymede since 1215. Her first public visit following lockdown in March 2021 was to Runnymede and Weybridge, where she attended the centenary of the Royal Australian Air Forces at the Air Force Memorial, itself opened by her in 1953. This is a fitting example of her commitment to duty and service throughout her reign. I saw at the recent Jubilee what she meant to my constituents, with all the celebrations, garden and street parties, and the lighting of the Chertsey beacons. One of the highlights of the Jubilee for me was my school visits, where I saw countless portraits of the Queen created by local school children, mostly Da Vinci's, some Picasso's, and everyone demonstrating Her Majesty. And now, as we mourn her passing, the scale of the impact on all of us, the UK and the Commonwealth, is clear. I believe that if we all aspired to have even a fraction of the compassion, integrity, dedication she displayed for the world, we would be in a much better place. I hope that part of her legacy is that each and every one of us use this time to reflect on her example and what this can teach us. Her attributes will live on in the long tradition of the monarchy, in the reign of our new king, King Charles III. Runnymede and Weybridge sends its love, its thoughts, its prayers to His Majesty the King and all the royal family. If our grief is raw, I cannot imagine the pain her family are feeling. Our Queen was loved throughout the world. Her legacy lives on. God save the King.
Scott Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise with great sadness to pay tribute to Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, on behalf of myself and of all of the people of Blackpool South. Throughout her long reign, Queen Elizabeth was a figure of national pride, a symbol of stability, of continuity, and an inspiration to so many, myself included. But just as importantly, we must not forget she was also a loving mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. It was just a couple of months ago that I attended street parties across Blackpool for the Platinum Jubilee. The celebrations brought together people from all backgrounds, all faiths, people old and young, a testament to her ability to unite the whole country and to keep the monarchy at the forefront of our nation's life during a reign that saw unparalleled social change. She opened up the family to the general public and made us feel as though we knew her personally. And in return, over the decades, we loved her and shared in her joy and in her grief, most notably on the sad loss of her rock, Prince Philip, only last year. Those constituents of mine who had the privilege of meeting her always, without exception, spoke about her warmth, her humility, and how she made them feel so special. Her late Majesty was not likely to be Queen when she was born, let alone to become Britain's longest reigning monarch. But from the very beginning, service to her country was in her DNA. Her devotion to this country is encapsulated in a remarkable speech on just her 21st birthday, when she stated that we must give nothing less than the whole of ourselves, and when she took on the noble motto, I serve. Unquestionably, she gave the whole of herself to this country, epitomised by serving it to the very end and swearing in her 15th Prime Minister just 3 days ago. It will take a long time for the tremendous sadness felt by us all to pass, but we can be comforted by the way in which she touched the hearts of so many and served our glorious nation so well. The example that Queen Elizabeth set has been instilled in King Charles III's own sense of duty and service. At a time of immense sadness for him personally, he has taken on the responsibilities of the Crown and the leadership of our nation and the Commonwealth. Our thoughts and prayers are with him, and we offer him our loyalty and devotion at this difficult time, just as we know he will give it to us. As we move into a new era in this great country's history, Her late Majesty will always remain in our hearts. God rest her soul, and God save the King.
Nick Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I extend my thanks to you for allowing this sitting to be extended for members who want to pay tribute to do so. And I know I speak on behalf of all of my constituents in Warrington South when I extend my heartfelt condolences to His Majesty King Charles and the royal family on this deeply sad occasion. Yesterday was a day we all knew would come, yet still can never quite envisage happening. And I think it's a testament to Her late Majesty's longevity, both in life and as our Queen, that all of the United Kingdom and throughout the Commonwealth, we are deeply moved by the loss of the one constant in our life. Indeed, last night when I walked along the Mall to Buckingham Palace, that affection was really evident. Young and old, different languages, all coming to lay flowers, lighting candles, spontaneous rounds of applause, the national anthem being sung, people paying their respects. Truly a Queen for all the people. We are fortunate in Warrington to have had Her late Majesty come to visit on no less than 4 occasions. Way back in 1968, she was given a tour of the newly refurbished Bridge Street. In 1979, when she and her late husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, toured the new Golden Square shopping centre. And most recently, in 2012, when she and the Duke opened the Orford Park Jubilee Hub in the year marking her 60th anniversary on the throne. Many members today have talked about the twinkle in her eye. And I have to say, looking at the photographs from those visits that have been republished today in the Warrington Guardian, it's the impression that she leaves on other people's faces that is really striking. And the true legacy of our Queen is the impact she had on so many people. We will now inevitably look back at 2022 with great sadness, but we must also reflect on what joyous occasions it was to mark the historic Platinum Jubilee. And each one of the many events I went along to in Warrington, it was clear how deeply she was held in affection by the whole nation. A mother, a grandmother, a great-grandmother, and the Queen to each one of us. That celebration of her long reign over us allowed people to come together and be part of a community and share a special time. For now, as we mourn the passing of a truly great monarch, we wish our new king every success as he assumes the mantle of responsibility that has so diligently been carried out by our late Queen over the past 70 years. On her 21st birthday, then Princess Elizabeth declared before us all that her whole life, whether it be long or short, would be devoted to our service. That life was long, and that service was certainly devoted. God bless Her late Majesty, and God save the King.
Dean Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and also may I thank you for extending the day and to your team for staying so late in the evening to allow these speeches. It is with great sadness that I rise to pay tribute to Her Majesty the Queen on behalf of myself and my constituents across Watford. We have heard loving tributes from across the House today, and we all mourn her loss and will grieve together. But what is grief, if not a reminder of the strength of our everlasting love? And we did love Our Majesty, the Queen. Many of us never met her, but as we have heard today, we all felt we knew her. In fact, we loved her as if she were a member of our own family. And many of us, as we know, often invited her to our own Christmas Day after dinner. Her image has been ever present in our lives, like family photos on our fireplaces, We may not always look at them, but we're reassured that they are there. And now she is gone. But her legacy will last forever. For every tear we wipe away, a precious memory remains. As we've heard, many of those memories are from visits to our own constituencies, and I have stories from my own constituency in Watford too. In 1946, when she was still a princess, she visited the Hearts show in Canterbury Park. In 1962, she alighted the Royal Train at Watford Junction, and in 1981, she visited Parmenter School. But in 1977, for her Silver Jubilee, she visited the Rolls-Royce factory in Leavesden. And Mr. Speaker, I admit to having a special family connection to that factory, because that is where my wife's parents first met. And I share this because I still recall the excitement and pride my in-laws had when they received a letter from the Queen when they reached their diamond wedding anniversary. Now, sadly, my father-in-law, John, who was married to Pat, has since passed away and is always sadly missed. But I can still vividly recall the image of his proud smile when he showed me the letter from our wonderful Queen. So perhaps therein lies the truth why our grief is so strong for Her Majesty. It is because she connected with us so personally, and our memories feel like those of family. She was yet a constant in a world of change, and yes, her compassion brought us humanity even when the world could seem so cruel. And yes, her words of wisdom brought hope even when all seemed so lost. But perhaps Her Majesty's true majesty was that her unbounding kindness made each of us feel like we mattered to her, and that is why she mattered so deeply to us. She was loved not just because of what she was, but because of who she was, our nation's very own great-grandmother, our compass, our matriarch, our guiding light. So I say thank you, Mum. You were loved by us all, and in your honour, we lovingly support your son and heir, King Charles III. God save the King.
Virginia Crosby.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Today we are united in mourning our beloved Queen Elizabeth II. For 70 years, she has been a source of stability and comfort. She's the only monarch that many of us have known. I begin my tribute by remembering the warmth and joy that she brought to so many of us. Our Queen, she knew how to have fun and make us smile. Remember when, joined by her beloved corgis, she teamed up with 007 to parachute into the opening ceremony of the 2012 London Olympic Games, or when she took tea with Paddington Bear earlier this year. I attended Jubilee events across Unismorn and saw there the joy that the Queen brought to people's lives, with people coming up to me from Amlwch to Pentraeth, sharing their personal experiences of meeting the Queen. As their head, Her Majesty was immensely proud of the professionalism and dedication of our armed forces. And I know that the team at RAF Valley, where the Queen came to visit her grandson, and Unismorn's veteran population will feel immense pride in fulfilling their oath of allegiance to her. The Queen was a frequent visitor to Wales. She visited the port of Holyhead and Beaumaris Castle, opened Oriel Morn in Llangefni on Anglesey, and was awarded an honorary doctorate from nearby Bangor University. During her Diamond Jubilee visit to Wales, she said, "I've travelled the length and the breadth of this country during my 60 years as your Queen. Prince Philip and I have shared many of the joys and sadnesses of the Welsh people in that time, and I have always been struck by your sense of pride and your undimmed optimism." Her Majesty's dedication to service and her contribution to public life are unparalleled. She provided inspiration to millions of women aspiring to the highest offices. She was a patron for Girl Guiding and a long-serving member of the WI, which had its first meeting on Anglesey. We've shared the ups and downs of her life as she danced with us in victory and success and mourned with us at times of grief. Her sorrow at the loss of her devoted husband, Prince Philip, was felt by us all. And although our sense of loss is immense, we must take comfort that she is once more at his side. And as our United Kingdom moves into a new era, I welcome the announcement by our new King today that his son, Prince William, who began his married life on Anglesey, where he was stationed as an RAF search and rescue helicopter pilot, will become our next Prince of Wales. On behalf of the people of Ynys Môn, may I say diolch yn fawr and express my sincere thanks for a life well lived and send our condolences to her family. God save the King and God bless the Prince and Princess of Wales.
And we finally have Louis French.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, very much. A wonderful life of duty and service and an inspiration to generations of people across the world. It is a huge honour for me to stand and pay tribute to the Queen on the behalf of people in Old Bexley and Sidcup, and also my family here in the UK and overseas in Canada. As a community, country and Commonwealth, we now come together to mourn the loss of our Queen, the ever-present in our lives, whether that be on national occasions, singing the national anthem at public and sporting events, or my personally fondest memories of watching the Queen's speech over family Christmas dinner. We all have our own personal and shared memories of the Queen, who will forever be in our hearts. I'm immensely proud to have discovered in the build-up to the Platinum Jubilee that an online poll confirmed Old Bexley and Sidcup, my home, as the most royalist constituency. Now, when the French journalist asking for an interview told me this, I stopped and thought about my own experiences locally, both growing up and now. Similar to colleagues, at every primary school visit, the first question asked, have you met the Queen? At most community events, as far back as I can remember, what do? We stand together and we sing the national anthem. Experiences which I'm sure are shared across the country. And little did I know when I sang the national anthem with the ambassador for Nepal last week at a community event with our brilliant Bexley Nepalese Gurkhas and Nepalese community, little did I know that would be one of the last times that I would have the pleasure of singing God Save the Queen. During the wonderful Platinum Jubilee celebrations, there were over 140 official street parties in Bexley, which I understand was one of the highest in London, reflecting how cherished Her Majesty is locally, and it was my immense privilege to attend many of these community events. I also remember the excitement when the Queen last visited the London Borough of Bexley in 2005 to officially reopen Danson House, which is in my right honourable friend for Bexley Even Crayford's constituency, just over the border from mine, where she was greeted by crowds of well-wishers. But it's also important to remember a previous visit to Bexley, which was in 1953 to Erith, the honourable member for Erith and Thamesmead's constituency, after the devastating floods, which is a reminder of how the Queen was there for us throughout the good times, but also the bad, and the way her presence brought both comfort and hope to people at times of concerns in an ever-changing world. The Queen was an inspiration to millions around the world, a fashion and sporting icon for her love of the horses, the mother and grandmother of our great nation, and who can forget the corgi emojis from the Platinum Jubilee, which highlighted the evolution of technology during her reign and how she embraced it. I think I found something no one said so far in 11 hours there, Mr. Speaker. Rest in peace, Your Majesty. As a working-class lad from Bexley, it was my greatest honour to swear an oath of allegiance to you when entering this place, and you make us all proud to be British, and in my case, an Englishman. We will continue to serve loyally your heir and son, King Charles III, and all the royal family are in our thoughts and prayers. On the behalf of the people of Old Bexley and Sidcup, I say, God save the King. Thank you.
Can I just say, this is when the House is at its best, when it is united in grief that brings us together with so many stories and memories that's been paid in such moving tributes. Can I say we've had 182 contributions and tributes today, and it's a big thank you to you all, but it's a big thank you to the staff of this House, the police, the security, the catering, and everybody involved, and especially the clerks in their fine wigs today. And can I say, thank you to you all for what you've done. I now come to the motion on the sittings of the House. Minister to move.
On this sad day, Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the sittings of the House motion.
The question is, on the order paper, as many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. Order, order! A German? Yes, no.
He's going with the German.
Okay.
Have him with the German.
No, there is no German. Many that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. Thank you, Sergeant.